So we're going to switch gears and begin to review some of the essential outcomes from the grade 9 course. If you remember, the essential outcomes were the outcomes that we talked about throughout the year that were what I would say is your non-negotiables. So the outcomes, you can think of it as the skills, the concepts that we need students to be fairly confident with, fairly comfortable working with as they continue on to the next grade level. And I've decided that to start off with our essential outcomes, we're going to focus in on our powers and exponents unit, which I believe, if I remember correctly, would take us back to October. So I think it was the second unit that we covered in the course. So we're going to start with even the basic of what is an exponent, what is a power. Then we'll move on to the exponent laws, the power laws that we talked about throughout the year. And then the important questions where you end up having multiple exponent or power laws involved in a single question. All right, but let's start off slower today. So first of all, I keep saying power, exponent, what is that? So you'll notice it tells you a power is an expression made up of a base and an exponent. So there's a little 4 to the power of 5. So that's how you can say it. You can say 4 to the power of 5, 4 raised to an exponent of 5. You will find that people often interchange the use of power versus exponent. So just so you're aware of that. Then it tells you the base is the number you multiply by itself in a power. So I'm going to highlight here, this is our base. So we would say that the base for this power is 4. And then the exponent is the number of times you multiply the base in that power. So for this example, the 5, that would actually be the exponent. All right, and then what happens when you put these two together, so put a somewhat square shape around it, this whole thing we would refer to as a power. Now, the importance of using powers, so it tells you a shorter way of writing repeated multiplication using a base and an exponent is called exponential form, and then I put in brackets, or it's also known as just write it as a power. So below here, what I've done is I've taken, this is in power form, so maybe I'll start with that. So this here, this is considered, so the new word is exponential form. Okay, but you can also say that this is written in power form or as a power. So they mean the same thing. Okay, versus here, so when I go 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, this would be considered repeated multiplication. So this is repeated multiplication. All right, so this is why we want to use powers, right? If I had this where I wanted to go 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, so I'm taking a number and multiplying it by itself over and over and over and over again. For example, if it was like 100 fours being multiplied together, I don't want to keep writing that out, right? That's pretty painful. So the shorthand is you can write that as a power. So whatever number you keep multiplying over and over and over and over, that's your base. Okay, so again, maybe I'll highlight that. So this is your base. That's the number you multiply over and over and over again. And then the number up here tells you how many you had. So if you look, right, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's practice this. Example 1. So it tells you write 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 in exponential form. So as a reminder, this form here, this is called repeated multiplication. I'm also going to point out sometimes it'll be referred to as expanded form. So you might come across that. Okay, so if I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, that would be in repeated multiplication form or expanded form. When I want to write this in exponential form, sometimes it helps if you think about, to be in exponential form, you're always going to have some base, and it's always raised to some exponent. So I don't know, it might be helpful actually to go back up here. So the general form, instead of having a number example, you can think of, you always have a base raised to an exponent. And I'll just color code that again. So base, and then exponent. So then if I use that for example 1, sometimes it's helpful. Well, why not identify what's your base, what's your exponent? So for this question, the base is the number that keeps getting multiplied by itself. So 2, 2, 2, 2. 2 is our base. And then the exponent is going to be how many 2's are being multiplied. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. So then to take this repeated multiplication and then write it as a power or write it in exponential form, I would just say that it's a base of 2 raised to the power of 4 or raised to the exponent of 4. Okay, so this is repeated multiplication, means the exact same thing as this exponential form, so written as a power, just this is a little bit simpler to work with. Question B is asking you to evaluate the power. So we're going to actually evaluate this, figure out what is the answer to it, so what value do you get. But I will remind you, so we had the repeated multiplication, right? So I know that 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 would give me some answer. Okay, so this is not evaluating as a power, but I just want to show you that we'll get the same answer. So if you go 2 times 2, you'll get 4, times 2, you'll get 8, times that by 2, so double it, you would find that the repeated multiplication comes out to a value of 16. All right, now this is fine if you only have a couple of the bases being multiplied together. But again, keep in mind, this will not be efficient if you had like 100 and some 2's. Maybe you had like 2 raised to the power of like 1026. That would take you a very long time. To evaluate the power from exponential form or power form, down the road you might be comfortable enough to just actually know this off the top of your head. But as the numbers get a little bit bigger, that'll get a little bit more difficult. So I do want to make sure everyone knows how to enter this using a calculator. All right, so I'm going to list a bunch of options and I'll show you the keys that you push on your calculator. The key thing is you need to figure out how your calculator works and where your exponent button is. If for some reason you can't find it, please take a picture of your calculator, send it my way, and then I will help you figure that out. So I've listed a bunch of options that might be tied to the calculator you have. So I'm going to zoom in here. So the only difference is the button you'd be pushing. So some calculators have, and sorry that Y is a little bit squishy, but some have like an X to the power Y button. Some have a Y to the power X. Some have an X just raised to the power of, and there'll be like a little square here. Other calculators will have, I call it a hat, it's actually known as a caret, but they have this button, so you'd go like 2, and then I call it the hat button to the power 4. And there could be other options out there, I just can't think of them off the top of my head. So again, please figure out how your calculator works, and then just make sure that when you go 2 and raise it to an exponent of 4, I often say 2 to the power 4, make sure that you can get an answer of 16. Okay, so if you're not getting 16, maybe pause the video, send me a picture of your calculator, and then I'll help you out, and then you can continue on. Example 2 tells you to evaluate each power. Now, what I like to do when I'm working with powers and exponents would be to identify your base. Okay, so I often highlight, these are my bases, and I'm going to write that down. I'm going to label them at the same time just because of the colors. So my base for question A is 4. My base for question B is 3. Right, so remember the base is the number that you keep multiplying over and over and over again. And then I'll identify that this number up here, so I think of it like the number that's kind of been pushed up to the top, that's always the exponent. Okay, so question A, I'm going to write down that the exponent is 2, and then at the same time, I'll write down the exponent for B is 6. Remember, the exponent tells you how many times you'll have that base. So it says evaluate the power. One option is, if your exponent is not too big, you might just prefer to go, well, that's like 4 times 4, right? You have this base, which is the 4, and you have it 2 times. So it might make sense for you to then, and just section this off, to then say that this would give you an answer of 16, okay, by going 4 times 4. Now, that's okay as long as it's not a whole bunch of 4's multiplied together. So what I do want you to try is, again, using whatever button works in your calculator, you would enter the number 4. Okay, use the button that gets you to your exponent power option in your calculator. So keep in mind, this might be different for you. And then you tell it that your exponent is 2, and then you should find you will get the exact same answer. All right, question B. So same idea. I'll just box this off. One option would be, you could just write out that you have your base 3, 6 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so if you wanted, you could go 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, but chances are pretty good. At some point, you might reach for your calculator. So if that's the case, then why not just go straight and enter in 3, whatever your exponent button is. So I'll switch it up this time. Maybe you have the x to the power y button. You would tell it that you have that 6 times. You have the number 3 6 times being multiplied together, and you should find out that that answer would be 729. So I'll just add it up here as well. Example 3 again says evaluate each power. This is going to appear as if it's becoming quite repetitive, but the reason why this example is really important is you will notice now you start to include negatives. So this one doesn't have negatives, but there's a negative that's part of question B, there's a negative that's part of question C. So let's work with these separately. And again, this is when it becomes really important to identify what's your base, what's your exponent. So I'm going to highlight the base, exponent. So for question A, the base, which is the number that keeps being multiplied over and over by itself, is 2, and the exponent is 4. I'll just separate that. So again, one last time with the multiplication where you show it repeated. That's like you having 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Okay. Well, you could then say that's 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2, you would get 16. So that one's not bad. You could probably do that without a calculator, hopefully. But again, we're focused in on using the exponent button, the power button on our calculator. So double check that you could go to, switch it up, maybe of this button, and then you enter the 4, and then you'd also get an answer of 16. All right, question B though, a bit of a change. So this time, if you look, your base is actually the negative 2. So I'm going to highlight that, and your exponent is still that 4. So for this question, the base is actually negative 2, and my exponent is 4. So if I were to write this out as repeated multiplication, now because it's a negative number, I would probably use brackets. So that means I have negative 2, negative 2, negative 2, negative 2. So I have that base, negative 2, 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. So notice the difference from A to B. A, all the 2's were positive because my base was positive. But now B, all the 2's are negative because the base is actually negative. It's inside the brackets. And if I did this without a calculator, you could go negative 2 times negative 2 would give you positive 4. Times that by negative 2, you would get negative 8. And if you times negative 8 by negative 2, you actually will end up with a positive 16. Using your calculator, what I would suggest, if the base is negative, I would actually use brackets. So I would actually use my brackets. So bracket, and then however you enter negative 2, I'd probably close the brackets just to be sure. Use your exponent power button, tell it that it's raised to the power of 4, and you should find you still get the exact same answer. All right, so then if we look at question C, the common error is students think that question C and question B are the same, but actually what happens, this is your power. So because there's no brackets, this is actually the power, which means this little negative out front really implies it's like you have this. It's like you have a negative 1 times 2 to the power of 4. Okay, remember some people say 2 raised to the exponent of 4. So now when I identify my base, this base is actually 2, and then my exponent is the 4. So this question, the base is actually 2, the exponent is 4, and again, this can get kind of busy, so I'll block it off. All right, so what this means is if I were to rewrite this in repeated multiplication, the -1 is just like a coefficient out front. Okay, so it's a number in front that's going to be multiplied. So I could rewrite this as -1, but then this piece would be like me having 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. All right, if I multiply this, so -1 times 2 is -2, times 2 is -4, times 2 is -8, times 2. This one would actually give you a value of -16. If you were to enter this in your calculator, what I would suggest is you want to think of it like this first. So I would go -1 and then multiply, so times, and then my base is 2, and then whatever button you use, put the x to the power y button again, to the power 4, and you should find out that you get the same answer of -16. Okay, so I'm going to put a star by this question. Really, really important to identify when you have a negative, is it part of the base? So this one was because of the brackets, versus this is actually like there's a -1 in front. So this negative isn't part of the power, it's just a coefficient. So then the power actually is talking about a base of 2 and an exponent of 4. Okay, so when you come across negatives, just try the question and then maybe double check it and think about, is the base actually negative, or is there a -1 kicking around up front? Okay, so let's do 2 more together. So number 4 still says the same thing. Evaluate each power. And again, probably a good idea. Identify your base, identify your exponent. So here, my base is -4. It's in brackets. And then my exponent is +3. That's the easy part, right? Just read off the number that's sort of pushed up to the top. Okay, at this point, it's up to you. So if you don't feel like you need to write out the repeated multiplication, you jump straight into using the calculator. I will show you both just for your notes. So this is like -4 times -4 times -4. All right. Now you're going -4 times -4 is +16. When you multiply that by a negative, you will actually get a negative answer. So that'll come out to -64. Or using your calculator, I would use brackets. So I would go bracket. However you get a negative, be careful. Some people try to use the subtraction symbol and it'll give you an error. So I put -4, I would close the bracket. My calculator actually has the caret or like the hat button, 3, and I should find I get the exact same answer. Question B, you'll notice, looks a little bit busier. Not only does it have one negative, but it actually has two negatives going on. So questions like this is where I think it's really important to identify what's your base, what's your exponent. And sometimes it's actually easier to kind of work backwards. So when I get a question that's a little busier like this one, maybe first identify, okay, here's my exponent. I'm going to list that first. So I know the exponent is 6 because it's the number that's sort of been pushed up to the top. And then go backwards. So this is my exponent. I'm going to notice that, well, the exponent is part of this power. Okay, so that means my base is that -5 that happens to be in brackets again. So here, I would write down my base is -5. So what's different about this one is there's that negative kicking around up front. So remember, that's not part of your power, but it just means that you have a -1 that's being multiplied by this power, which is -5 to the exponent of 6. So if you wanted to do this in repeated multiplication, that's like -1 times -5 And then I got to make sure that I write out 6 of those negative 5s. There's 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so this negative here is actually a negative 1 in front. This is my power, so that's written out in repeated multiplication. So up to you, if you wanted, you could then multiply this all out, and you would get negative 15,625. But again, try to use the exponent button, the power button on your calculator. I would go negative 1 and then times. I always use my brackets, so bracket negative 5 bracket, and then raised, so to an exponent or power of 6, and you should find you get the exact same answer. Now what I want you to do is you're going to try 3 questions on your own. So you'll notice there it says your turn. There's a question A, a question B, a question C. They look very similar. So they have 5s, they have 2s, but what's different is where the negative is located with the expression. So what I want you to do is push pause on the video, try these 3 questions. It's up to you. If you want to write out the repeated multiplication, go right ahead. If you want to just evaluate it as a power, that's fine too. A side note on a question like this, if it's only raised to a power of 2, these would be questions that you should try to work towards completing sort of as mental math, so without using your calculator. All right, but if you are getting stuck and it's been a bit since you worked with these questions, feel free to use your calculator to get you started. So push pause, try these questions, and then come back, see how you make out. All right, so check out how you made out. Question A, I'm going to point out the base is negative 5, that's in brackets. It's raised to an exponent of 2. So if you go negative 5 raised to an exponent of 2, you should find out that the answer is 25. Okay, and the reason for that is you're going negative 5 times the negative 5. The negatives cancel out, and you end up with that positive value. Question B, this time this negative in front, keep in mind, okay, I showed with a little arrow, it's just a negative 1 that's being multiplied by this power. So the power itself has a base of 5, exponent of 2. When I calculate that, this one actually ends up being negative 25. So notice the difference. This was a negative 5, but raised to a power of 2, and I get a positive answer. This one was actually a positive 5 raised to a power of 2, but then I'm multiplying by negative 1 after, which is why this is negative and that one's not negative. All right, and then question C, again, similar to the last question actually that we did above, this one up here. So this negative really just means you have a negative 1 that's being multiplied in front. That's not part of the power. The power is this piece here, right? So I have a base of negative 5, exponent of 2. So if you evaluate this, this one also comes out to negative 25. Okay, so you'd have negative 1 times the negative 5 times the negative 5. And again, if you wanted to use your calculator, just to double check, I would enter it like this. But as mentioned before, right, if it is just raised to a power of 2, you want to get pretty comfortable with those questions to be able to answer them without using the technology. Okay, so what I want to do now is you're going to complete a practice sheet on using exponents to describe numbers. What I suggest, do a couple questions, check your answers, a key has been provided. If you are having trouble or if your answers aren't matching, please stop, take a picture, email it to me, and then I'll help you figure out what might possibly be going wrong. And then when you've completed the worksheet, what I want you to do is identify sort of how you feel you're doing with this part of the outcome. And you're going to do that using the little emojis that you're sort of used to from class. So you will use a smiley face. If you got this, you're ready for the next step. You're going to write down a neutral face. If you're sort of iffy, so if you're not sure and you think you might need a little more practice. If you put down the neutral face and you think you might want more practice, maybe identify some questions that you feel like you might want some extra help with. And then the sad face would indicate that you need extra help. And if I see this on your page, then I will find some extra ways to help you out with this material in more one-on-one sort of individualized way. All right, so try the sheet, let me know how it goes. And other than that, have a wonderful day.